community, ladies and gentlemen, that is suffering the most is the Falun Gong community. They are actually, a lot of them are in concentration camps. You say, well, concentration camp, what do you mean by that? In fact, these forced labor camps that are across China, there are at least 350 of them, were set up by Mao in the 1950s based on the ones in Hitler's Germany and Joseph Stalin's Russia. All it takes is a police signature and you're off to these camps for up to 4 years. When you get to one of these camps, you work 16 hours a day. By the way, I've talked to people who've managed to get out of these camps and to get out of China. In about 15 countries I've met with these people, David Matas and I, and we've talked to them. You work about 16 hours a day. You're fed very poorly. In the case of Falun Gong, you're tortured regularly in absolutely inhuman ways. And you are paid absolutely nothing. So you say, well, what are these people doing in these camps for work? Do you know what they're doing? They're making a whole range of materials ranging from Christmas decorations to shirts, to garments, to slippers, you name it. These things are made in these camps. And you say, well, what happens to them? They're made as subcontractors for multinational companies. And of course, the multinational companies don't want to admit that they're getting these things, for example, Christmas decorations from a forced labor camp. So they go through middle people and they try to put as much distance between themselves and where these goods are coming from. But how many of you knew that we're buying, in the West, we're buying, for example, Christmas decorations made in forced labor camps? I'd be interested in how many of you know that. I don't see any hands going up, so I assume it's not very many. But the problem for these people is even more serious, because every 3 months in these camps, these concentration camps, doctors arrive and only examine the Falun Gong practitioners. They examine their organs, they look in their eyes, they see how healthy they are. And as you may not know, Falun Gong, I'm not a Falun Gong practitioner, but I have the utmost respect for Falun Gong. They're in something like 130 countries now, including, of course, Sweden. And I find them to be honest people who peaceful, non-political, who have all the values that any civilized person would hope to have. What happens is that let me pick an example. If Petra needs a new liver, and I know you would never do this, but you can basically fly to Shanghai, you check into the #1 People's Hospital in Shanghai, a doctor, he may well be in military uniform, comes and examines your blood type and your tissue type, gets them down, looks in the computer, and says there's a match for you out in work camp number 250. The poor woman who's in all likelihood a Falun Gong practitioner, because the other prisoners don't get examined for their organs, it's just Falun Gong. She's dragged into an operating room, as you mentioned, and given a light anesthetic. All of her organs are taken out. They're flown from the work camp, probably in rural China, by People's Liberation Army airplanes to Shanghai. You get the new liver, and you're told you're getting it from a convicted murderer who was going to die anyway and so really didn't need the organ. And yes, it's true, some of these organs do come from convicted murderers or other capital offense victims. Do you know how many capital offenses there are in China? The last time I looked, it was 58, including tax fraud. But what I'm saying is that you come back to Stockholm and you have a new liver, and you're fine, and you've probably paid $130,000 US for it. And I met one man, I won't mention the country, who went for a new kidney, and was a military doctor in uniform. This is in our book, we don't give his name. Brought him 8 sets of kidneys before he could find a kidney that was compatible with him. What happened, of course, is that 8 human beings, and I'm sure at least half of them were Falun Gong, were killed so that he could have a new kidney. Can you imagine that this is happening in the 21st century? Happening in a country that's one of the major countries in the world? So why I'm here and why a lot of us, including Petra and people, doctors against forced organ harvesting, and a lot of people in a lot of countries, we're trying to get you to help us put enough pressure on the government of China that they will stop this obscene crime against humanity. And I think they're quite close to the point where they're going to stop it. I don't know whether you noticed in the New York Times today, they say that President Xi has announced that forced labor camps are going to be closed. Well, if so, I think that's a significant step forward, obviously. But the trouble is they've announced it before and it didn't happen. Those of you who know China, really think that the government of China is going to give up an immensely profitable industry where every human being who's killed for their organs is worth about $500,000 if their organs are sold? I hope I'm wrong, and I hope it happens, but I'll believe it when I see it. And so time is really of the essence on this, that if you can help us, you can help save innocent men and women's lives by doing something tomorrow, phoning your member of Congress or phoning a member of council, or doing whatever you can, writing a letter to the editor, something like that, to help build the pressure on the government of China. I've told you that. Yeah, the way you say, well, why does this happen? Why are the Falun Gong community being singled out? After all, they do gentle exercises. They believe in truth, compassion, and forbearance. Why would they be being singled out so much? I've heard many explanations of this, but probably the most accurate one is that, as I said before, they grew from 0 to between 70 and 100 million practitioners in about 7 years, which was more practitioners than there were members of the Communist Party. The other reason, I think, is that their values, things like truth, compassion, and forbearance, are completely out of sync with the values of the Communist Party of China. So one of the worst leaders, I think, in recent Chinese history, Jiang Zemin, and you mentioned him, decided in April of 1999, let me tell you what happened. It's actually a fascinating story. The Falun Gong community in Beijing had a number of articles written attacking them, and they decided they would go and protest, which is their legal right, around the Communist Party headquarters in Beijing. About 10,000 of them gathered on the sidewalk silently. They didn't even leave litter, if you can imagine. They said nothing. They just sat around the party headquarters for the day. President Jiang Zemin came out of the headquarters in his black limousine with tinted windows, drove around, and he saw that in the crowd were members of the party, diplomats, academics, soldiers. Everybody was doing Falun Gong, and the party was actually encouraging it up until then. He drove back into the party headquarters, and that night he wrote a letter, which has been seen, saying, "Who is going to prevail, Falun Gong or the Communist Party?" And tragically, very tragically, he declared war almost the next day, and the war has continued up to and including today. So I could, I've actually talked about this in many, many places. You say, well, what evidence do you have that Falun Gong are being killed for their organs? Well, I was a prosecutor for 10 years in Canada. I should know something about evidence. And David Matas has been a lawyer for 35 years in Canada. The evidence, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely overwhelming that this is happening. We actually found 52 kinds of evidence. Petra said it was circumstantial. By the way, I don't know how many of you are lawyers, but do you know what circumstantial evidence is? It's when you find a dead body, you find a bullet in the body that came from a gun that was being held for a man, probably a man, whose fingerprints you have. Now, the trouble with what's happening in China is that the victims, as you gather, are all dead. The people who are doing these terrible operations are being paid enormously for it. They don't give evidence. They're not going to come and tell us. So we have one piece of the 52 pieces of evidence is this. The wife of a surgeon in Sujiatan told us that her husband removed the corneas from 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners over a 2-year period, 2001 to 2003. Well, as I mentioned before, he broke down and they left the country. But we have got enormous amounts of evidence, and if you want to ask me about it in question or comment period, I'll be happy to tell you more about the evidence. Oh, you can get our report on the internet. Simply go david-kilgour, KILGOUR.com, and you can get our report in 18 languages, including, I think, I'm quite certain, Swedish. So you can judge for yourself if the evidence isn't strong enough. I think I'm probably running out of time. I was going to tell you a little bit about what other governments are doing about this. In Australia, the government of New South Wales is proposing a law in their parliament to say that anybody who buys a trafficked organ anywhere, the bill doesn't even mention China, is committing an offense. Let me tell you about Israel. Israel has actually done the most. Up until about 2007, the insurance company in Israel would pay people who needed a kidney or a liver in Israel to fly to China, pay their airfare, pay for the organs, which was enormous amounts of money, and would pay to bring them home. Thank goodness Dr. Jay Lavie in Tel Aviv discovered what was going on, and he passed a law which basically bars Israelis from buying trafficked organs anywhere. Since that time, nobody, to my knowledge, has gone from Israel to China to buy an organ. Why doesn't Sweden do the same thing? You may be saying to yourself, well, how many Swedes are going for organs to China? I certainly don't know, but I know that there are people going from Britain to China still. I believe there are people going from Canada. And if nobody's going, fine. But if you pass a law saying that no Swede may buy a trafficked organ anywhere, then your consciences would be clear. And I would encourage your parliament to do that. Other countries have done some things. Others have done very little. Spain is the leader. Spain has, as you probably know, Spain has the best record for voluntary organ donations. And obviously, I'm in favor of voluntary organ donors. Spain has launched a lawsuit this year against one Spanish patient who went to China for organ transplants and promoted the behavior. So in Spain, they are really taking a tough stand on this, and again, I would urge you to do the same. I hear Sweden. Do Swedish nationals who travel to China for organ transplants and subsequently receive aftercare here? I think they do. You probably guessed that these organ transplants are done in total secrecy. They're done, I think, badly, a lot of them. A lot of the patients die after they get these organs because they're badly done. The identities of the doctor, for example, are now concealed, so you can't get any record from China as to how they're being done and what was done. I'm just about ready to... So I guess finally then to close, recommendations. The main one, we have about 20 in our book, but the main one is to please pass a law in this highly respected country that bars Swedes from going to buy a trafficked organ anywhere. Is that a good place to stop and we can have questions, comments? Thank you very much.